The contract in the quiet houseth envelope arrived on a Tuesday, thick, cream-colored, with no return address. Lena Morales traced the embossed edges before sliding her finger under the seal. Right. The paper inside was crisp, the words stark. Marriage. Contract. She read it twice. Once in disbelief, once in resignation. It's the only way, Amelia Duarte, the attorney, had said. Sebastian Rivas needs a wife for appearances. You need the medical coverage for your grandmother. The terms were clear. 1 year, no intimacy, no claims to his wealth. Just her presence at a few events, and in return, her grandmother would receive treatment at the best private hospital in the state. Lena signed without ceremony. The house was colder than she expected. Stone walls, high ceilings, windows that let in light but no warmth. Sebastian Rivas stood in the foyer, his posture rigid, his gaze avoiding hers. He was taller in person, his dark hair streaked with silver, his hands shoved into his pockets, like he didn't know what to do with them. Your room is upstairs, he said. His voice was low, rough at the edges. You'll have your own space. I won't disturb you. Lena nodded, thank you. They didn't speak again that night. The days blurred. Breakfasts in silence, Lena stirring her tea too long, Sebastian flipping through newspapers without reading them. She explored the house when he was gone, tracing the spines of books in the library, running her fingers over the dust-covered piano in the parlor. Then she found the camera. It was tucked in an old cabinet, vintage Leica, with a slightly scratched lens. She lifted it carefully, pressed the shutter release. It still worked, that afternoon. She took her first photo, a sliver of sunlight cutting through the hallway, illuminating a single fallen petal from the vase no one ever remembered to fill. She left it on his desk. No note. The next morning there was a fresh flower beside her coffee cup, a peony, deep pink, its petals just beginning to unfurl. She looked up. Sebastian was watching her, his expression unreadable. You have a good eye, he said. And for the first time, the house didn't feel quite so quiet. The gallery opening was supposed to be simple. Small exhibit in downtown Napa, showcasing emerging artists. Lena hadn't even told Sebastian she'd submitted the photograph, a black and white portrait of him in profile. Standing by the window of the library, his fingers curled around an old book, his expression unguarded for once. She called it the architect in silence. When they arrived, the gallery was already buzzing. People clustered around her photograph, murmuring. A critic from the San Francisco Chronicle turned to her, eyes bright. This is extraordinary. Who is he? Lena hesitated. A man who doesn't like to be seen. Sebastian stiffened beside her but said nothing. 3 days later, the email arrived. Subject: urgent media inquiry. Is Morales. Our sources have obtained a copy of your marital contract with Sebastian Rivas. The press is preparing to run the story tomorrow. Would you like to comment? Lena's stomach dropped. She found Sebastian in the garden, pruning the roses with more force than necessary. Someone leaked the contract, she said, voice tight. His hand stilled. Who does it matter? Exhaled sharply, tossing the shears onto the grass. I'll call my lawyer. We'll sue and make it worse. Lena shook her head. They already think this is some twisted transaction. If we hide now, they'll never stop. Ah! Sebastian studied her, his gaze sharp. What do you suggest? She met his eyes. We tell the truth. The press conference was held on the estate's front steps. Reporters crowded the driveway, cameras flashing. Sebastian stood at the microphone, shoulders squared, while Lena waited just behind him. Yes, he began. The marriage began as a contract, but no clause in it mentioned how she'd make this house feel like a home again. His voice was steady, but his fingers flexed at his sides. No clause, said she'd remind me that art exists. In the smallest, quietest moments, a reporter shouted, So you're saying you fell in love? Sebastian didn't flinch. I'm saying the contract doesn't define us anymore. Lena stepped forward then, slipping her hand into his. The cameras erupted. That night they sat on the terrace, the sky streaked with stars. Sebastian handed her a glass of wine. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Do what? Stand next to me. Lena sipped the wine, the taste rich, and Darka wasn't standing next to you. I was standing with you. Silence. Then softer. Tell me something real about you, he said. She thought for a moment. I used to be afraid of the dark. When I was little, my grandmother would leave the hallway light on for me. She said monsters don't like the light. Sebastian's thumb brushed the back of her hand. And now I think some monsters are just people who forgot how to be seen. He looked at her, then really looked in for the first time. She thought he might let her see him too. The call came at dawn. Lena had been awake already, curled in the window seat of her room, watching the sky bleed from black to gray. When her phone buzzed, she knew before she answered. Ms. Morales, it's about your grandmother.
You didn't
Cry. Not when the nurse spoke, not when she packed her bag, not when she walked downstairs to find Sebastian already dressed, car keys in hand. I'll drive, was all he said. The road stretched empty before them, the sunrise painting the hills in gold. Lena pressed her forehead to the glass, counting mile markers to keep from counting regrets. I should have visited more, should have told her I loved her one last time. Sebastian didn't offer hollow comforts, just the steady hum of the engine. The occasional brush of his fingers over hers when he shifted gears. The funeral was small. Handful of neighbors, her grandmother's old bridge club, the nurse who'd held her hand at the end. Lena stood at the podium, the words she'd prepared crumbling in her throat. Then warmth, a hand between her shoulder blades. Sebastian, stepping close enough that she could feel his breath when he whispered, just say what's true. So did she taught me that love isn't something you say, it's something you do, every day, in the smallest ways? Her voice broke, like leaving the light on so I wouldn't be afraid. Later she wouldn't remember walking back to her seat. Only the weight of Sebastian's arm around her, holding her upright. The house felt hollow after. Lena wandered to her grandmother's rocking chair, the wood worn smooth from decades of use. She pressed her palm to the armrest, half expecting it too still be warm. Sebastian appeared in the doorway, 2 mugs steaming in his hands. You should drink something. She took the tea, clutching it like an anchor. I don't know what to do now. He sat on the floor at her feet, his back against the chair, not looking at her. When my wife died, he said slowly, I thought if I stopped moving, stopped feeling, the guilt would swallow me whole. Lena stilled. He'd never spoken of her before. We fought that morning, about the house, about work-stupid things. The roads where I see why. His throat worked. For years I told myself, if I'd just gone after her. Lena's hand found his hair, fingers threading through the dark strands. Not pity, just presence. Sebastian leaned into the touch, his breath shuddering. I built walls so high even I couldn't climb out. Then you walked in with your damn camera and your quiet eyes, and she slid from the chair to her knees, facing him. Their foreheads touched. No words, just shared breath, shared hurt. When he finally pulled her into his arms, it wasn't gentle. It was desperate, like he was trying to press every broken piece of them back together through sheer force. Lena clung just as tight. The contract had brought them here. But this was something no piece of paper could define. The door to the old studio creaked as Sebastian pushed it open. Dust motes swirled in the morning light, settling over half-finished canvases and dried-out paint tubes. Lena hovered behind him, her fingers brushing the frame of a portrait. Woman's face, barely sketched in charcoal, the eyes left eerily blank. Your mother's? She asked softly. Sebastian nodded. She never liked finishing them, said the magic was in the first strokes, before reality ruined the vision. Lena stepped inside, running her hand along the shelves cluttered with clay sculptures. In jars of brushes? Why'd you keep it locked away? Because it hurt to remember how alive she was in here. His voice was rough. Because I didn't deserve to touch her things after he cut himself off, but Lena knew. After I couldn't save the other women I loved, she picked up a paint-stained apron from the hook, slipping it over her head before turning to him. Help me clear the dust. Not for her. For us.
Us.
They worked in silence, Sebastian hauling out old drop cloths while Lena wiped down the windows until the panes gleamed. At one point, She caught him staring at a half-empty tube of cobalt blue, his thumb rubbing over the cracked cap. She used this for the sea, he murmured. Never could get the color right. Said it was never as deep as she remembered. Lena stilled. Then, slowly, she reached into her bag and pulled out the travel camera he'd given her, the one engraved with his promise. She extended it to him. Show me. Sebastian froze. I don't, not with paint. She pressed the camera into his hands. With this, his fingers trembled around the device, but he lifted it, adjusting the lens with an architect's precision. When he finally looked through the viewfinder, it wasn't at the studio or the mess, it was at her. The shutter clicked. Lena laughed, surprised. I meant the ocean. I know, he said, but took another photo anyway, this time of her laughing, backlit by the sun. By evening, the studio was transformed. Canvases were rehung, fresh paper laid out. Lena had tacked up a string across one wall, clipping her favorite photos along its length, Sebastian reading The Vineyard at Dawn, his hands shaping clay in a rare moment of unguarded play. He stood in the center of it all, turning slowly. You made it alive again. Lena shook her head. We did. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small wooden sign she'd carved in secret. Casa Clarita, it read, named for his mother. Sebastian's breath caught. When he took the sign, his fingers lingered over hers. You don't have to stay, you know. The contract's almost up. She stepped closer until their chests nearly touched. What if I want to? His answer was a kiss, low, deep, and tasting of salt. Not an ending, but a beginning. The acceptance letter arrived on a Thursday. Lena sat at the kitchen table, sunlight pooling over the thick parchment paper embossed with the seal of L'École des Arts Visuelles de Paris. 3 months, a fully funded residency. A dream she'd buried. Years ago, now blooming back to life in her hands, Sebastian walked in. Still damp from his morning shower, a mug of coffee steaming between his palms. He took one look at her face and froze. You got in? She nodded, throat tight. He set the coffee down, pulled out the chair beside her, said the words she hadn't realized she needed. You're going.
Oh.
The weeks before her departure passed in, a blur of stolen moments. Sebastian, tracing the curve of her spine in bed, as dawn light crept through the curtains. Lena, pressing her lips to the pulse point beneath his jaw, while he muttered measurements into his phone for a new project. Neither of them spoke about the looming separation, but it lingered in every touch, every glance. The night before her flight, he took her to the vineyard. They lay in the grass, fingers tangled, watching the stars flicker to life. Will you write? To me? He asked. Every day? He turned his head, studying her profile. Even the boring parts, especially those. She laughed, but it caught in her chest when he reached into his pocket and pressed a small velvet box into her hand. Inside wasn't a ring, but a delicate silver key. To the studio, he said quietly, so you remember where to come home. Paris was everything and nothing like she'd imagined. The light on the Seine at golden hour, yes, but also the ache in her. Ribs at 3 a.m. when she rolled over to find cold sheets. She photographed it, all the crooked smile of her elderly neighbor, who left croissants at her door. The way rain slid down her tiny attic window, the empty chair across from hers at cafes, where she pretended to read while missing him. Sebastian's letters arrived like clockwork every Monday. Not love notes, but life sketches of the garden he was redesigning. Complaints about the contractor who kept misplacing his blueprints. A pressed lavender sprig from the bushes they'd planted together. It's strange, he wrote in one, how you can memorize the exact curve of someone's shoulder, but still forget how they smell until they're gone. She slept with that letter under her pillow. The day of her return. Fog swallowed the runway whole. Lena stepped off the plane, her camera bag slung across her chest, the silver key warm against her skin, and there he was. No sign, no fanfare. Just Sebastian in his worn leather jacket, hands shoved in his pockets, looking at her like she was the only thing that had ever been in focus. She didn't run. They met in the middle, his arms wrapping around her so tightly her feet left the ground. You're late, he murmured into her hair. She pulled back just enough to see his face. I brought you something. From her pocket, she produced a single photograph. A self-portrait taken in her Paris studio, her smile soft, the silver key gleaming around her neck. On the back, she'd written, "Proof I always knew my way home." Sebastian kissed her then, right there in the middle of the terminal. While the fog outside lifted to reveal a perfect California morning. Epilogue. 5 years later, the lavender field was in full bloom when their daughter discovered the old camera. "Papa, what's this?" she called, holding it up with sticky fingers, her sundress fluttering in the breeze. Sebastian knelt beside her, showing her how to peer through the viewfinder. "Magic," he said. "Your mother's kind." Across the field, Lena watched them, their son asleep in her arms, the sunlight catching on the silver key that still hung around her neck. The house behind them was no longer quiet. The studio door stood perpetually open, paintings and photographs covering every wall. And when the wind rustled through the lavender, it carried not just the scent of flowers, but laughter, the kind that comes when love isn't written in contracts, but in the daily act of choosing each other again and again.